series of Salesforce developer interview questions and answers. Now we will look at some more tricky questions or more tougher questions that may come to you uh, from the trigger topic. Okay, so let's get started. So the question that will come to you, we have already seen trigger handlers in the last video. If you're not seen, please take a look. So what are trigger handlers? So the interviewer may ask you, what is a trigger handler? So the answer is, trigger handler will actually modularize classes to store the trigger business logic, which is called from the trigger body. So this is like in Spring Boot, it's like it is like a separation of concern, okay, where the service logic is separate from the business logic. It helps in, sorry for the spelling mistake here, it helps in debugging, organizing, and enhanced error handling. So now let's look at the trigger example code. So what really you have to do is, so you will create a trigger on an object and handle all the events. But look here, hardly any minimum actual business logic code lies in the class and the static method. See, before delete, before update, before insert, and this is where it lies. So you see, you don't see any logic written over here. Everything, everywhere you see account trigger handler dot something. So that is the static method of this class. So this is how the trigger body should look like, whereas the trigger handler will take the bulk of the code. Like here, see, like say for example, inside account trigger handler, in the before delete, you pass the parameters that you want to handle, the trigger.old and trigger.old map, and then within this method is where you're going to handle the logic. So this takes care of the before delete, this takes care of the before update. Okay, so this is basically what a trigger handler is. So the key thing that you have to tell the interviewer is, you will write your logic in classes, and the trigger body you will call that handler class from the trigger body. Okay, so what does this help is, it helps in better control. See, like say for example, if there is a problem in the before delete, you don't need to close all of this, you can just comment this out, whereas these functionality can continue. Okay, now I'm not talking about in production, I'm talking about in test environment also. So you don't need to block the whole trigger logic, only this particular logic you can comment out, and you can check what is going wrong inside the before delete. Okay, so this helps in modularization as well as better debugging and code control. Now next is, you will there is something called as recursive trigger. What is a recursive trigger? Sometimes triggers may file again and again and again and again due to sometimes due to some race condition or logic which creates which updates multiple objects. So sometimes we may have triggers which updates multiple objects, and sometimes comes back and updates the parent record which has fired the trigger. So that same trigger on that account will keep on firing. So suppose you create account, then contacts, and then do some operation on account. In such a condition, what will happen is the triggers will keep on firing the same trigger for one transaction. So recursive trigger is the same trigger on a transaction which keeps on firing multiple times. So to avoid this, how do you avoid this is, you want to make sure that the triggers don't fire more than once for a transaction. Is what you do is, you'll have to run first time, change this, you'll have to create a static variable in a class, in a trigger handler class, and initialize it to true. And then you once it initializes to true, once your trigger runs, what you can do is, you can change the value of the static to false, because a static variable, okay, once you log in into once you log into the org and you start working on it, a static variable maintains its state throughout the transaction. Okay, so suppose you log in, create 1 record, 3 records, 4 records, and in the first stage you make it true, and then you make it false in the first occurrence of the trigger. What will happen is, it will remain in that value will remain till the transaction is over. So this is an example of how you will prevent recursive triggers. You will create a separate class over here, and within that you will have a static variable. You will initialize it to true, and then within the thing you will check over here, if this is the first time within the trigger, you will check. Then in that case you will allow it to fire, and then once you run the handler, after that you will immediately switch off the static flag. So next time when it comes over here, if it is running recursively, this will not enter the business logic. Okay, so it will run only once.